Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Bradley, and I run analyst relations at Lucidworks. Thanks for joining today's webinar, The Case for Semantic-Based Approaches to Product Discovery. Before we get started, I want to go over some housekeeping. We'd love to hear from you during the webinar. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, just enter them in the Q&A box. We'll have time at the end of the session to answer the questions that come in. The session will also be recorded and sent to you after. Today's presenters are Scott Compton, Senior Analyst at Forrester, and Peter Curran, General Manager of Digital Commerce at Lucidworks. Scott is an expert in retail e-commerce and direct-to-consumer marketing. Scott advises companies on the strategies and technologies needed to serve the customer within today's quickly changing e-commerce environment. And Peter is an expert in e-commerce. For 25 years, he has worked on just about every e-commerce business model, category, and company size. Now I'll pass it over to Scott to kick off today's presentation. Take it away, Scott.
Thanks, Alex, and thank you, Lucidworks, for having me on this webinar. I really appreciate the time. And hello to everyone out there in the audience. What we're going to do is we're going to take you through what is happening that's new and exciting related to site search, especially digital commerce search. I'm going to take you through a quick lay of the land related to what's happened over the past year in terms of COVID and COVID response, some of the expectations that Forrester is looking at over the next couple years. We'll dig into some search turning tools, so we'll get into some tactics, and then we'll pull back out to some futuristic looking ways that incredible technology providers like Lucidworks are moving the ball forward. So with that, let's jump right in. So we've all seen charts like this over the past year or so, basically, hey, trying to figure out what in the world is going on with COVID and how the next few years could look. Essentially, Forrester's predictions are that we will be returning back to shopping in the store, but online sales will continue to grow, right? We're looking at 15 or so, almost 16% growth over the last year, 12% for next year, and then it flattens out around 11% for the next 2 years. So in context related to e-commerce and why is site search important, because we're still going to be seeing at least 11% growth over the next few years. And if we look at what kind of challenges retailers are having at this very moment and over the past few months, as we all know, and some of the challenges that customers are having as retailers scramble to try to adapt to the COVID scenario. One of these aspects here, 1/3 of online US adults note that items were out of stock and that shipping times were longer than expected. And this was fielded in August. So 1/3 of US adults are having friction in their purchase process. And 24% of US online adults who started using curbside pickup during the pandemic do expect to continue after the pandemic is over. And this is one of the big questions out there, right? So we've seen quite a bit of shift to driving e-commerce dollars, some offline shopping behavior moving to online, but what's going to stick and how is it relevant for what we're trying to solve in terms of our customer experience on our sites, in our apps, and especially over site search. So what I'm going to jump into now are some digital commerce search best practices. And really the goal here, as always, is matching customer intent, and which can sometimes be pretty challenging to derive, right? And matching that product or customer intent with product information. And some of this is going to seem a little bit basic, but what I urge you to do is listen to this through the context of what's happened over the past year related to COVID-19. And see where I guarantee that everyone on this call can take something away from this call. That's my goal, at least. Everyone, whether you're at a strategic level or at a tactical level, can take something away from this call that can affect the business very, very quickly. So let's jump right in. So in terms of search and navigation, we've all had this question when we're setting up search on our sites. Some of this, it's coming, inherent in your e-commerce platforms or solution suites. Others, you may have plugged in other additional tools related to search. This question always comes up. Should I be showing thumbnails in my dropdown, right? So as someone's typing in auto-suggest, should we be showing thumbnails or not? A great example here from Costco is showing thumbnails for regularly identifiable products. Very much of this depends on your vertical. If you're in apparel, showing thumbnails might not do it. But if you're seeing a Cheerios box, you know exactly what a Cheerios box is. You can get right into that product very, very quickly. So depending on your vertical and depending on the recognition of those products at a small size, pretty recommended in terms of providing visual cues to expedite that search process. Next one is about predictive search. Now, as auto suggest begins to fire off, as we type in 3 letters or so into that search field, what's showing up and how relevant and how meaningful are those results that are coming through? What's really great is when we can be interruptive with highly relevant results, right? If we can put in front of the customer what we know they're looking for in a meaningful way before showing them an entire product set, then we're shortening that path to discovery of that actual product. One of the ways that we're seeing here at Ralph's, and what you'll notice actually is we've got quite a few grocery retailers in this deck. And the reason why is because they've literally had to scramble over this past year to improve their site search, coming from legacy systems and trying to solve very large present day problems related to COVID-19. So you will notice quite a good trend of grocers in here, but they've actually come a long way this year. So Ralph's doing a really good job here of showing suggested products in the dropdown. They're showing categories as well, but one of the unique features related to Ralph's is there's an actual add to cart in the suggested dropdown. And that's a little bit of a new feature. We don't see that everywhere. For a commodity type environment or a place where you're selling CPGs, easily recognizable products, and or especially products where that customer is repurchasing the same product over and over. So they've got product recognition top of mind. Super way to drive that add to basket action. And don't forget to track this separately than a straight add to basket from the product detail page. All right, let's get into search filters and results. Now, search filters are not new. We've been handling these with product attributes for at least 15 years now. I can say in my 20 plus years of e-commerce experience, oh gosh, a good 60% of my experience was related to site search specifically, guiding people through initial setup and additional tuning sessions to really dial in conversion. Now, so we're all familiar with filters or facets, whatever you might be calling them on your end and your teams. But basically, it's a way to break down those search results so that those results are relevant to the customer as quickly as possible, right? And hopefully in bite-sized chunks that they can identify, especially on mobile, and get to and select their product set that they're looking for very quickly. Now, a couple features that I'd like to call out on this page that are a little bit different than what we've had to deal with historically related to search filters. Clearly, if we're taking 2 examples here, one at Amazon and one at Target. At Amazon, the features that I want to call out are ratings and reviews. I mean, clearly, Amazon was one of the first doing them out there, and they've really taken it to the next level, making sure that ratings and reviews are not only in the filters, but on the product detail page when you get there. So there's some continuity in that experience. That one seems like, okay, no-brainer. We've kind of all been doing that for a while, but some of you haven't been. So if you're not doing ratings and reviews, and it's a prominent path on your site related to click-throughs and add to baskets, then highly recommend getting them into search filters. Now, some area that I would highly recommend is this one that we're seeing both here at Target in the upper right and the example here at Amazon is getting your fulfillment options or those product sets that are related to specific fulfillment options into your search filters. One of the things that we're seeing because of COVID-19 shopping is customers are shopping across brands more than they ever have. They're shopping across products, either upsizing or downsizing in cases. And they're also shopping for products that are going to be delivered within a predictable window. And what that means is basically giving that customer a very easy way to filter that result sets down so that they can say, hey, I need to see anything I can get today, or I need to see anything that I can get, with free shipping, or whatever that last mile solution is, providing filters for them to dig down into that product set that's the most relevant to serve their need in the moment. So a little bit, like I said, filters, not brand new stuff, but connecting some of the dots related to stock status or delivery timeline and or actual fulfillment method is somewhat new, and definitely want to make sure we are connecting those dots for those omni-channel consumers out there. A little bit more in terms of filtering. I honestly can't say enough, and I honestly don't think you can go far enough with filtering. As long as you're surfing the relevant filters in the moment, then you can go as deep as your product knowledge can get you, right? A few examples here with grocery retailers are going to the next level related to nutrition, dietary, and lifestyle filters. So you can see here at Albertsons, at Costco, H-E-B, and Publix, all three of them are going that extra mile and, diving into both, the caloric content of every item that they're selling, as well as dietary features such as gluten-free or vegetarian, things like that. Basically capturing the consumer's values within which they're shopping and surfacing those in search filters so they can tailor down their search result sets. All right, content search. This one I can't stress highly enough. Many of us are still on legacy e-commerce platforms, suites, or whatever you want to call them, where site search on our e-commerce platform isn't actually searching all of the content on our site. It may only be searching our product database. So one of those things, if you're in that type of situation, one of those things we want to do is try to break out of that mode to where we are searching content, relevant content across the site. And I don't mean spamming just all kinds of crazy merchandising content. I mean relevant content that gets the user to a relevant product set that serves the need of them in that moment. One of the great examples that we saw here as we were looking through grocery providers is here at Publix. At Publix, they actually let the customer search through recipes, and they can search ingredients and then find recipes as well. So really connecting those dots and multiple paths to the same content is really how you want to be thinking about content search. And make sure you're getting those indexed. Make sure if you don't have a way to do indexing of standard content, consider redirects, and we'll talk about that tool in a little bit when we get into tuning. I can't say enough about merchandising and providing rich content on your sites. This is something that a lot of apparel merchants, a lot of specialty retailers are very, very good at. Grocers are catching up over the past year or so, but we're seeing a lot of great traction. And a specific example here at Amazon is in how when you get to an actual product page at Amazon, and these are a couple food pages, they're not just showing you the information related to that specific food. They're showing you information related to the entire collection of foods that are related to the one you're looking at. So you could think of it like developing out content that's similar to cross-sells and upsells, but at the very least exposing a collection of products if someone may have arrived at that particular product page and doesn't know about the rest of the collection. So what we're doing in a sense is giving the customer a way to dial down into a product set very quickly, but if they do so, giving them a way back out to a larger collection. And one of the most beautiful ways to do that is with really elegant merchandising, such as we're seeing here. Another really cool way to get content onto the product page that's super relevant is in dealing with comparison shopping content. And there are a couple ways we can do this. A lot of our e-commerce suites out there already have a comparison shopping tool built in. That's one way to do it, and certainly highly recommended. Another way to do it is to build in comparison charts into your product detail pages or into the specs pages of your products themselves. And again, like I was saying on the slide previous, basically this allows someone, if they dial into a product very, very quickly because of search, it also provides them a way back out to a larger collection. Badging, really, really important, especially when you consider cross-cultural audiences who may be visiting your site, who can see at a glance what something means, even if they don't know the language, right? Or even if they're visually impaired. There's a few ways to handle this. One recommended way, super simple way to do it, is to have a simple icon for many of your potential filters, especially the ones that get used a lot. And a great example here at HEB was them using little icons as their lifestyle filters, right? So carb aware, fiber source, go local, organic, things like that. And what that does is it allows the customer, as they're browsing across the site, to easily identify, without even really reading, what products are related to that set and what are the values related to that product set. Another great example here on the right by Publix was how they go the extra mile to actually define those badges with actual content. So not just surfacing a badge as a visual representation, but putting content behind each of those badges, knowing that there's a buying value behind each of those decisions. So reinforcing those badges with really content related to that lifestyle. And we've got some new use cases coming up as well. And some of us have crossed this bridge already in terms of retailers. Some of us are looking at it, and some of us are thinking, I'm never going to get here. But I will say that some of these solutions are not as tricky as they might seem. However, what you have to do is gauge it by your customer needs, right? So you may not need image search if you're doing, straight CPG products in grocery. You might not need that. Everyone knows what a Cheerios box looks like. But for example, if you may want to do image search if you're doing something like a fashion collection, right? Show me shoes that look like this. And there's been a lot of advancements over the past few years related to computer vision that's making associations between products that really you could only get from a very adept merchandising team. So we'll look into a few of those in just a few slides as well. So in a nutshell, before we jump into the tuning section, which we're going to get into next, this first section was really trying to illustrate, hey, here's our new situation related to COVID-19. We've got customer experiences that are shifting. Basically, they're spending less time on our sites. They want to move through quickly. They're shopping across brands and across products. How can we make that experience easy for them? The answer is search, tuning and search, and make sure that we're capturing upcoming use cases such as voice, image, and scanning search, which you're seeing here. So this is the lay of the land and kind of what we're seeing in terms of search lately. Now, none of it is entirely groundbreaking in terms of customer experience, but connecting those dots of all those data pieces so that you know what's in stock in what store and what can be fulfilled today versus tomorrow can be a little tricky for a lot of retailers and the systems they've got working out there. So keep up the great work. It's making a huge difference in terms of the customer experience. So let's jump into, so we've done the front end, right? We've talked about what does it look like for the actual customer shopping on the site? Well, what does the back end, something we really need to dig into is what does the back end look like? What does behind the scenes look like of an effective search program? And this is sometimes, even given the same tool, retailers will have very different disciplines about how they handle search tuning, how often, how deep, and how long tail or short tail they might be going. So let's dive into a few of these activities real quick. So in a nutshell, and this, I would call this traditional search tuning because many of these tools are still at a manual level. When you go in as a business user into your search tool, lots of these are still at a manual level where you're going to go in and maybe adjust some field map and weightings or add some synonyms or add redirects, boost or bury products. These are activities that most search teams are fairly adept in doing, but most of them will be nodding their heads when I say it's a very manual process, and there can be a lot of knots related to those manual processes. So let me take you through a guide of how I approach search tuning, and we'll go through each one of these really quickly. Let's start with field mappings and weightings. Essentially what we want to do, actually, let me back up one second and say, consider how often you are doing these kinds of search tunings against the product refresh rate that you've got coming into your store. If you are a specialty retailer, like let's say apparel, and you've got 6 seasons a year, you absolutely need to be doing search tuning at least 6 times a year, right? If you're turning product even more quickly, you need to be doing it more quickly. If you're having out of stock problems due to supply chain issues, you need to be jumping on search tuning to handle those types of scenarios as well. So as you can see, as the pressure heats up on search as a customer experience tool, so do the requirements on the back end of making sure we're providing relevant sets. And this is how we get there. So what we want to do is start at global settings. And the global settings here are really your field mappings and weightings. And essentially this is, in a nutshell, it is, if someone types in a keyword, what field do I go look for that keyword match and or synonym? And what weight do I give a match on that particular field? And as an example, a match on product name is probably a lot more relevant than a match on long description field, right? So making sure that we've got good content in the fields that we're mapping to, and that our weightings are prioritized according to the content in those fields is really the goal of a field mapping and weighting exercise. Verifying the content is valid, pointing to it, making sure it's mapped accurately, and then weighting them according to the relevant content. So more relevant content comes up, least relevant content goes down. Pretty simple, but these are very broad brushstrokes. So these are something you need to be a little bit careful with when you're in there field mapping. These are global settings for the most part. Now, if we jump off of global settings, which is where I would start first, take a nice read, use your data, see what's working, see what's not working. Go in, do your top 200 keyword searches. Go do them. Go look at those product sets, see how they look, and then move on to finer tunings. The next tuning I would move to is synonyms. And this is exactly what it sounds like and something we've all been doing for quite some time. Basically, if someone types in one word, then also show results for another word. Like I said, we've been doing a lot of these, and the only caution I would suggest here is that these synonyms do change over time. So it is something that you do have to continually kind of care and feed. Redirects, very much the same way, especially, like I said, we've been doing redirects for quite some time. A lot of us are in the practice of tagging on UTM parameters or other tracking tags onto our redirects. We need to be very careful when we do those kinds of hard cut redirects with tracking parameters. It can really jack up your tracking. So make sure if you're doing redirects, make sure you're keeping track of what they are, and make sure that you're not adding tracking parameters that are going to influence the data on the back end. And then boosting products. This is something that that is relatively new in search tuning. About 10 years ago, we barely had this at all. Nowadays, it's fairly common, the ability to pretty easily boost or bury products in a given result set. And the beautiful thing is that you now have the power basically to merchandise your search results in a way that we never had the power to do so before. And I think this has, affectionately been called searchandising, which I love that term. It's exactly what you're doing. The only caution I would put into this mix here related to boosting products is that most circumstances when I'm unraveling problems related to site search, or digital commerce search, it is almost always related to some hard-coded rule that someone has put into the system. Either my field mapping isn't set, I've got an old redirect to a bad page, or I'm burying product that I should be seeing. So the power, basically, we've got the power here to do a lot in terms of managing your result sets, but with that power also comes great responsibility, and we have to keep track of what we're doing. Otherwise, we wind up with a giant knot that we try to unravel every time we have a use case problem. Okay, I'm going to move on. So I've talked about these a little bit. Cautions about using static rules. Now, like I said, we've got tons of tools in there. We can get in and monkey with these things until the sun comes up and try to get those result sets the way that we need them. The disadvantage is that we have to keep doing that. So static rules, as this first bullet here, static rules in a dynamic environment really do have their limitations. It takes care and feeding. It is genuinely not a scenario where you can set it and forget it. And if you are, or if your team has been, I would wake them up, because there's some really choice opportunity here to change the customer experience and conversion on your site. And doing it with static rules can be challenging, but it can be done. Hard coding products, the second one here, hard coding products into the result set can be really challenging when you've got out of stock situations. So if you're struggling with supply chain issues and you've got product, coming onto the site, coming off of the site really quickly, or if you have localized product that is having out of stock situations, hard coding products, boosting those products into the result sets can create result sets that don't convert, right? So something to watch for. Static rules also can sometimes overlap, which can create search traps that are really difficult to unravel. And like I said, in many of my problem-solving situations related to search tuning, I would say over 90% of the time, the problem was a static rule that someone forgot about, or that got set up 10 years ago by that person, 3 iterations of a role ago, right? So 10 years ago, someone put it into the system and you inherited it 3 people down the line. You don't know that's in there. And it's very challenging to unravel years and years of these kinds of tunings. And we've literally been doing these kinds of tunings within search tools for, gosh, I'm thinking about 15 years now, something like that. So there's a lot of legacy data to look out for. In terms of synonyms, something to be careful of are multiple meanings. And a great example here is khaki. For example, if you are selling brown pants, khaki means the color brown, but khaki can also mean the type of pant, right? Oh, I'm wearing khakis. So you want to make sure that you are scrubbing your own taxonomy for synonyms that might have multiple meanings, where you're narrowing the result sets too much or actually making the result sets too big. That can be a problem as well. Also, two-way synonyms is something to keep track of. So an example here is red and ruby. Let's say, for example, apparel merchants are great at this, coming up with exciting new names to call colors, right? So a great apparel merchant will almost never call something red. They're calling it ruby or garnet or whatever that might be, right? Hemoglobin, who knows? They come up with all kinds of creative terms. And what we want to do is make sure that if someone is typing in, hey, show me a red sweater, that we're showing them every red sweater, but also showing every ruby sweater, every garnet sweater, all of the additional reds. But if someone comes in more specifically and types in, show me that, garnet sweater from 1997, we're not going to show them all red sweaters. So when we're doing synonyms, we want to make sure that we're not equalizing terms that actually do have a hierarchy. And a red and ruby is a great example of that one here. And then I really, as I've been more exposed to customers and retailers as well as vendors and how they're using data, there's a few places that I'm really getting excited about how retailers are using search insights throughout their organization. One of them is in customer service. So if we're going through the exquisite detail of trying to discern what intent is by someone typing in a search box, why not empower your customer service reps who are going to answer that call to know what that customer was searching for when they came to the site? Pretty simple, right? You're just attaching a query to a customer record, right? In B2B, very, very similar. We can attach historical searches to the account records so that we know and can trend the types of searches that both people and accounts are doing. And then in customer retargeting, this one, most of us have been doing for quite a while, but something that, remind ourselves, hey, there might be some new ways to refresh this, is customer retargeting. Audiences can be built from search activity, and then lookalike audience can be drawn into the site with search advertising. And then also to drive new traffic into the site for free as possible is use your search insights to help understand and develop your new search landing pages that drive organic search. And then I'm going to touch just very briefly on the future here of search and how Forrester is seeing kind of the next evolution of where search is headed. If you look to the right, if you start with the customer has an interaction with the site, whether it's typing in keywords or interacting via voice or voice assistant, however that might be. They have an interaction, and then we take that through some natural language processing to derive intent, right? Once we have intent, we filter that through our taxonomy, the words that we're using to describe all of the products that we have. And we refine that query to say, hey, okay, now we know their intent. And here we know our taxonomy and database. Let's find a match, right? Once that optimization happens in terms of the query, then we process some business rules to say, hey, show me higher margin over lower margin, whatever those rules might be. And then we ultimately derive a site index that's meaningful for the customer in that experience, right? Now, most of the search tools that we're using right now are stopping probably at query optimization and some taxonomy. But when you get into the higher levels of, real taxonomy, real synonyms, even automated synonym, and also intent analysis that's powered by natural language processing, you've got a really, really powerful way to bypass a lot of the tuning that we just talked about. So, the goal really is to, if we haven't been tending search, go in, use your manual tools, and start tending that experience immediately. If you have been, then start looking for new ways to do those same activities in more efficient and more in ways that gives you better results as well, right? And there's a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning that can be brought to bear to go through those search tuning cycles and also to derive intent. So guys, this is it in a nutshell from Forrester right now, what we're seeing with search. Lucidworks, again, thank you for having me here. I'm excited to hear what is coming next, some great results you guys have been seeing over the past few months, and what you guys are excited about bringing to market. So with that, I'll turn it over to Peter.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Appreciate that. Great stuff. I wanted to say, too, how much I loved your grocery best practices paper back in December of last year, and how much I recommend it to folks on the call. Really, really great stuff, broadly applicable in grocery, of course, and outside as well. Yeah, so I'm here to talk about semantic vector search. And what I am really trying to do here is kind of use the ML capabilities that Scott talked about on his final slide to do away with all of those manual search tuning exercises that he talked about several slides before. And that's what we intend to do with our semantic vector search solution. To explain to you what semantic search is about and what it's good for, I want to take you to a experience in my life last Saturday night. So any of you who are in relationships and have regular date nights know that the COVID date night is very different, right? You're cooking at home, you're not out at a restaurant. And so my wife and I, we had made dinner and we were going to watch a movie. And as we were sitting down to the couch and getting the TV going, I remembered that I had seen a movie recommendation in Slack. And I went to the Lucidworks Slack and pulled up a message that I remember from a couple days ago, earlier last week. And I saw that this guy in engineering, Joel Westberg, recommended a movie called Palm Springs, and said he broadly recommends it for everyone. I think perfect. That's exactly the kind of movie that we should watch on our date night. So the first place I go is my Amazon Prime Video on my Sony television, and I search for Palm Springs. And the interface doesn't look like this on my TV, but so similar to this. And it comes back, and I see it right there, Palm Springs, and I click on it to watch the trailer. And about 2 minutes into the trailer, I realized that I'm telling my wife, hey, honey, we're going to watch this movie, Palm Springs. This guy at work thinks it's really awesome. And I realize I'm showing her this movie about a couple that becomes swingers in Palm Springs. And that is this the right movie? Is this the one that Joel was telling me about? And of course, the one that Joel was recommending to me wasn't Palm Swings, it was Palm Springs. And I had typed in the right thing in Amazon and my TV, but Amazon doesn't carry Palm Springs. It's a Hulu film. And so what they did is they took a lexical understanding of what I was looking for. They matched me to some kind of a piece here about retiring in Palm Springs, and then which I immediately discarded. I knew that wasn't a movie, but I thought that second one looked like, probably the movie, and I just didn't notice that it was saying swings, not springs, and so clicked and watched the movie. So that is an example of where a non-semantic lexical approach to understanding queries falls down. It leads users into an unintended experience. Now, to contrast that, I want to tell you about a different movie, and one of my favorite movies of the last several years, and I love horror movies, is The Witch. I don't know if you guys have seen it. If you want to watch a really scary movie with a lot of really interesting dialogue and language, I can't recommend it enough. It's got the creepiest game of peekaboo ever, and then the most evil villain at the same time. And so I watched this movie. I absolutely loved it, and I was in this horror vein, and I decided I want to go and see what are the other great horror movies that I've missed while I had little kids and wasn't watching a lot of horror movies. And so I go to Rotten Tomatoes and I say, hey, Rotten Tomatoes, show me all of the horror genre movies that get a high review and order them for me by their the tomato meter, right? The score that Rotten Tomatoes assigns. So I do that, and the number one item there from Rotten Tomatoes is called Bone Tomahawk. And so I think, okay, what's Bone Tomahawk about? I click on that, or I search for that rather, in my Amazon Prime Video app, and they have it. There you can see it right there, Bone Tomahawk. And that's the experience that we normally think about when we think about, you know, a good search experience. I type Bone Tomahawk, they gave me Bone Tomahawk, that's a match, right? But what do you do when you're Netflix and you don't carry Bone Tomahawk? And what happens here is I've searched for that term, Bone Tomahawk, and you can tell that Netflix doesn't have it, right? That movie is not there in the grid of titles available to me. But they clearly understand what that movie is about. What is the intent of that viewer at that moment? Is it literally only to watch Bone Tomahawk? Maybe it is, but if I'm only a Netflix subscriber and I'm searching for Bone Tomahawk, I'm probably going to be happy with an alternative that is similar. And so you can see that they pick out a movie that's a little bit scary, that includes Kurt Russell as the main character, and offer that to me as the first option. And then there are a number of other kind of horror, scary Westerns offered there. And this is what we're talking about when we say semantic vector search. Being able to understand, apart from the words that the user uses, what is it that they're really looking for, and give it to them, and this is the important part, give it to them with zero human curation. No tuning, no synonyms, no redirects, none of the stuff that Scott was talking about in that kind of legacy search tuning section in his presentation. And we all recognize that this is important. We hear when vendors talk about personalization technologies, we hear them often talk about, you know, giving the exact, you know, best product to exactly the product that the customer was looking for at exactly the right time. And oftentimes the problem is that that product that they're looking for isn't available. You don't actually have it. And so we understand this as consumers. We have things like this food substitutions table in absolutely every cookbook that's ever been made. And it tells us that if, look, you don't have buttermilk to make fried chicken, then you can take a lemon juice and squeeze it into ordinary milk and you're good to go. So substitutions is a concept that consumers have been familiar with for, you know, hundreds of years. We know it in the B2B context. So here you're looking at two crankcase covers for motorcycle. The one on the left is the old one that's busted. The one on the right is the new one. And the old one has got a part number etched into it. And if you go and search the manufacturer site or a motorcycle parts site for that number, you're not going to find that crankcase because that crankcase cover number has been superseded. There's a new product that is the equivalent, but it just goes by a different number, has a different, you know, manufacturer, and maybe even some slight differences in how it's manufactured and how it works. And so if the user is searching for that old part number, how do you get them the new equivalent part without a synonym? A third example that I would give you is, you know, what about when I'm shopping for travel? So if I'm looking for a Comfort Plus seat on Delta between Seattle and Heathrow, and that thing is sold out, instead of just showing me that the thing is sold out, how can I say, in addition to it being sold out, Mr. Customer, here are some places that you can find alternatives. Like you could shift your date. You could go to Gatwick instead of Heathrow. You could take this other flight later in the day or fly through Los Angeles. That's the kind of extra help I want when I get what would otherwise be a null condition as shown here. What about when we used to do half marathons a few years ago? One of my favorite brands is Lululemon. Lululemon there's a blog where people who love Lululemon, like I do, talk about it. Lululemon has a half marathon every year called the Seawees in Vancouver, British Columbia, and it's an absolutely beautiful half marathon. I ran it in 2013 and loved it. And they give out to all the participants pieces of Lululemon apparel, shorts and tops and things like that. And so this particular top is one that came out, I think, in the 2018 Lululemon Seawees. Now, suppose that you bought that and you love it, and but now because you've put on the COVID-15, you need a bigger size, or maybe you ripped it, or you spilled something on it and you want to replace it. And so because you love the color so much and you remember the name of the color, and their color names are really memorable, you go and search for that. You search for Vivid Amber. How do I bring back the equivalent kinds of product colors today using the language of 2018? How can I direct the customer to this, maybe this yellow running top instead of that yellow running top from 2 or 3 years ago? These are the kinds of problems that we're looking at solving with semantic vector search. When we bring our semantic vector search technology to bear on customer problems, we see unbelievable returns. We just did this with a top 20 US retailer in the fall of last year and ran our semantic vector search technology on their site through Cyber 5. And when we did that, we saw unbelievable results. First thing we saw is that over Cyber 5, utilization of the search path on this retailer's website grew. As they were more promotional, as they were doing more volume, all of a sudden users turned to the search channel twice as often as they did in the weeks and months prior. In addition, while that pie of how much people are searching is growing, the semantic vector search utilization for these really hard use cases shrank just a little bit, but because the overall pie grew, it also grew quite a lot. And that's because as people search more, the propensity for them to look for something really weird that you may not have a match for grows. And what we know from our test with this retailer is that when you show a customer results that are semantically relevant, that meet their goal, but may not meet the literal words that they entered, you convert it 2 to 3 times the rate of just showing them, sorry, we couldn't find that, try using different keywords, that kind of experience. The commercial results for that particular customer were massive. They had a 20% increase in click-through rate. The orders influenced by search grew by 30%. And we believe that that is due to the reduction of their null search events by 91%. And that's really the promise of semantic vector search. When we try to visualize semantic vector search, oftentimes people will talk about these things that look like star maps, or they'll talk about the way that language evolves over time. And most business users find it a little bit hard to wrap their heads around these kinds of ideas. So the thing that I prefer to think of is think of a grocery store. And if you're looking at a well-organized produce section, you know when you're standing next to the celery that you're probably pretty close to the radishes, and you're probably closer to the apples than you are to the milk, or closer to the apples than you are maybe to batteries. Those would be in a different part of the grocery store. And so that kind of holds up as a good analogy of what it means to put products and queries into vector space as opposed to a traditional search engine. Another place where you'll see this in a grocery is at the fish counter. So when you're at the fish counter, they'll have shrimp and crab and fish and all these different kinds of fresh seafood available. But then there'll also be a bowl of lemons. There'll be some lemon pepper maybe. There'll be things that you need like a cedar plank in order to cook the fish. So the grocer knows that they need to put certain kinds of products that are not in the fresh seafood category there for the convenience of the customer. And when they do that, that is what vector space starts to look like. All of the things that are related to an overall goal of a consumer are stored in the same place in vector space, and therefore it's easy to retrieve them when a customer is looking for something. Vector search is really good for the long tail. I think you probably realize right now. That means these really weird queries that people are looking for that are hard to predict, things like white gold, rose cut, ruby ring, use a lot of these words that can mean multiple things the way that Scott talked about. Rose cut is a particular kind of cutting, a way of cutting a gemstone, but rose can also be the kind of gold that is in a piece of jewelry. So being able to understand what all of these tokens mean together without having to do any kind of redirect or any kind of synonym work is the goal and the power of a semantic vector search solution, dealing with all of that stuff that we just don't have time to curate around. The way that we do this from a technical standpoint is we take Adobe Analytics clickstream data. We can also take Google Analytics clickstream data or other sources of signals, and we use only that to train two what we call encoders on a couple of different kinds of activities. What are people doing after they get a 0 results, and what are they doing after they get a non-zero result set? We take those two kinds of click paths and user behavior paths, and we build two vector spaces out of those kinds of experiences, and then we ask those two spaces for their opinions. And that allows us to solve use case categories like the one that you see on the screen here. So, for example, somebody's looking for something that you normally have, but that's fallen out of stock. Or somebody is looking for something that they think you might carry, but just isn't a brand that you carry. Or if they're using language that you just don't use when you describe your products. Or finally, if they're just spelling something wrong, right? There are usually some ways that search engines can deal with misspellings, but there are lots of different ways to spell things wrong, and sometimes search engines don't really do a good job of figuring that out. So these are the 4 use cases we solved for the retailer that I showed the results for a few minutes ago. And we did it with those encoders that I explained a moment ago. And what that then looks like is if you have a set of products like what you see here from Lowe's called ShopVacs, which is a brand of wet dry vacuum, and you go and you search for that on a site that does not carry that brand and does not describe those products as ShopVac because that's a proprietary brand name, but instead call them wet dry vacuums, then you're able to give results like you see here from Costco. Another example might be if someone is looking at buying a new sofa and they look at the Maxwell collection on Restoration Hardware, and then some time passes and they just forget, and they search for Maxwell's sofa on Williams-Sonoma's Pottery Barn website, which of course doesn't call their stuff the Maxwell line. You can see down at the bottom, Williams-Sonoma is recommending sofas that look a little bit like the Maxwell collection sofa from Restoration Hardware. So this is the kind of problem that we're trying to solve when we know or should be able to know what the customer is looking for. We just don't have that language on our records. So this is what we've built. We've put it into production. It's made our customer a big pile of money, and we're going to be rolling it out to many of our other customers. What are some other things that this can do? The first is that we think that it can be used to expand assortments, and this is kind of what we're working on now. So imagine someone searching a website for organic lemonade where I have one result, and my first option is to show all my lemonades. Now, what's not great about this is that we think that those two tokens have different value, that the word organic is more important and meaningful probably than the word lemonade. So how do we deal with the multiplicity of tokens and figure out which one is important in a given query? And that's kind of the place where we're taking this technology now, so that we can, instead of just showing all lemonades, we show all organic juices that aren't necessarily lemonades, and give the user the ability that they have naturally in a physical store. When they cast their eyes down on the lemonade, in the periphery of their vision, they see all of these other different organic products. We want to kind of do that same sort of thing when the customer is looking for a product on a website or in an app. Another example, suppose I'm looking for a novel title, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and I search for that on a book site, and I get that, right? I get that particular book. Wouldn't it be more interesting if I could understand that The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes can be understood as being a novel of a certain type from a certain author, and then I can expand and show all of the other books that come from that author or that are similar thematically to that book. So these are the kinds of things we're working on with semantic vector search, and have I think, a million more such use cases to uncover. If you're not sure what the use case is for semantic vector search with your website, we would love to do a site assessment, and I think the chat in the webinar is going to show a link where you can just go and ask us for a free site assessment, which will turn around in about a week, and can give you an idea of where our semantic search would work for you, whether it's zero results or low performing queries or superseded parts or some other use case that I didn't mention today. So I'm Peter Curran from Lucidworks. Our commerce and digital offering is really broad. We've just talked today about semantic, low-performing query, and zero results solution. We'd love to talk to you about more of the things that we do. So Scott, I think we would like to turn it over to Q&A. Are there any questions for us to answer?
Yeah, we do. We have a couple questions, and I'll give the first one to Scott, and then Peter, you can jump in after he answers. So the question is, how do you go about when the intent is not clear from the query? E.g., DKNY can be clothing or perfume or even curtains lately.
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things that's useful about the way that we do this is that we are looking at lots and lots of user sessions. So we have a rich set of data that kind of tells us what users mean when they search for something. So we are using user trails to sort of disambiguate the meaning of DKNY. We also have the ability to A/B test these things. So, if we see a certain, we can try a certain encoder for one set of opinions in an A/B test, and a different encoder for another set of opinions in a different part of that test, and then try to come to an understanding of how to understand that term. But really, that's the beauty of what we're talking about. It's not about using your deterministic thinking about what the user means. It's about putting products in front of users and letting users tell you what they mean by processing signals from those users.
Yeah, and I'm nodding my head. I concur completely. It is about assimilating those signals, right? And whether it's from prior historical data, someone came to the site and searched for a size 6 shoe, and so you kind of know, oh, they're probably looking for size 6 next time. But if you're looking at doing those kinds of things manually, this is an inordinate amount of work, right? You're basically solving for each keyword query, which is, it becomes pretty complicated, having to evaluate next click product, or which product was clicked and then added to cart if, search was DKNY. Was it perfume? Was it, apparel brand? There's a lot of complicated things there to do if you're doing it manually, for sure.
Great. And we have a follow-up question. Peter, you gave the example of organic lemonade. This question is, how do you decide that organic is more important than the lemonade?
Same thing. So the signals are coming in, but the thing that we're adding in right now to our semantic vector search offering is a query understanding layer that takes and classifies those terms and tries to understand kind of what they mean at a higher level. So organic means a certain attribute of a product. If you think about it, lemonade is even a little bit harder, because lemonade kind of is related to soft drinks. It's sort of related to juices. It's kind of related to a whole realm of products. So taking those tokens and trying to understand them at a higher level, and then once we understand them at a higher level, being able to A/B test and play with different kinds of interpretations, and then following those signals for how users respond to one interpretation versus another, and then settling on the champion understanding. That's the basic way that you do it.
Okay, we have another question, Peter. You mentioned the boatload of money that our unnamed customer achieved through using this vector search solution. This person asks, how can I estimate the ROI for semantic search? Can you double click into this?
Yeah, so one easy way to estimate it is to look at all of the queries that are returning nothing today and look at the conversion rate for that cohort, and then double or triple the conversion rate for that cohort and estimate what that would do for you. In addition, as we add query understanding capabilities to, we already have query understanding capabilities in Fusion. And what I'm talking about is building that into our semantic offering. But if you take those two things and put them together, now you can start to not just look at your zero results cases, but also look at your low performing queries. What are the queries that people, when they searched, saw products but didn't click on any of them? Or they saw products, they clicked on them, but they never carted them. Or they saw products, clicked on them, carted them, but abandoned cart. You know, those kinds of user experiences are ones that we want to target for a different kind of experience using the semantic search. And so as you take that cohort, that much larger cohort, and show some kind of improvement in conversion rate on those, that would be the basic technique for estimating the ROI.
Okay, this next question is for Scott. Semantic-based search sounds powerful, but it appears to have an operational impact as well. For example, throwing out an old spreadsheet to analyze low-performing searches one at a time. Question for Scott is, how do you see organizations evolving and the roles in commerce teams evolving as these more sophisticated solutions are in the hands of clients?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think some of it is related to upskilling, right? So taking those same employees who were doing those manual tasks, and if you've put in the technology and you're realizing, hey, I can trust this, and the return is there, then basically upskilling and teaching those folks how to take the tool to the next level, right? And I think a lot of the vendors out there will work with you on that particular task, but I think it is more about upskilling to drive the technology forward. It's not completely black box. You're still going to know what's happening. You're still going to have levers to pull. It's just taking so much of the manual work out and the really nitty-gritty data grind and making it a faster decision for the business user.
Great. Okay, and I have one more question. We have time for one more question. That is for Peter. You showed examples of semantic search results as well as semantic recommendations. When do you select one approach or the other for presenting products?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think deciding where you want to put semantic results is something that you need to do an A/B test on layout. So things like trying them as recommendations, saying, sorry, we weren't able to find anything, look at these recommendations, or even saying, here are the set of results that we have for you when you searched for this, but saying that in position number 3, I want to show my best bet semantic result. These are the kinds of experiments that we encourage our customers to run when they are when they're working with the semantic capabilities. Because placement and where you put things and how you present things, how you tell the customer, sorry, we couldn't find exactly that, but here's something else that you might be interested in. It's really is really important.
All right, well, we're at time. Thanks, Scott and Peter, for sharing your insights. Thanks, everybody, for attending and for submitting questions. All of today's content will be sent to you after the webinar, so please feel free to share it with your colleagues. If you'd like to get in touch with our team, you can send us a note at lucidworks.com/contact. Thanks again. Take care.